So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears to prepare for the service, to the sermon. Pastor Adonia is going to be giving the sermon this morning. I know she's really prepared a lot to finish up our sermon series, and she's going to be talking about fulfillment. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And we're going to start by sharing a short video. So if you know the song, feel free to sing along or just close your eyes and reflect or whatever you want to do. And then we'll have the sermon right after that.
Sometimes I think, what will people say of me when I'm only just a memory, when I'm home where my soul belongs? Was I loved when no one else would show up? Was I Jesus to the least of us? Was my worship more than just a song? I want to live like that and give it all I have, so that everything I say and do points to you. If love is who I am, then this is where I stand, recklessly abandoned, never holding back. I wanna live like that. I wanna live like that. Am I proof that you are who you say you are? That grace can really change a heart? Do I live like your love is true? People pass, and even if they don't know my name, is there evidence that I've been changed? When they see me, do they see you? I wanna live like that and give it all I have, so that everything I say and do points to you. If love is who I am, then this is where I stand, recklessly abandoned, never holding back. I wanna live like that. I wanna live like that. I wanna show the world the love you gave for me. I wanna live like I'm longing for the world to know the glory of the King. I wanna live like that and give it all I have, so that everything I say and do points to you. If love is who I am, then this is where I stand, recklessly abandoned, never holding back. I wanna live like that. I wanna live like that. I wanna live like
There we go. Good morning. So wonderful to see all of you today. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Thank you so much for coming. It's crazy to me. I was saving my notes into a folder for this Sunday, and I saw that it said 8/12, and I thought, this is August? Is it really August already? Are my kids really going back to school next week? I feel like we're already knocking on the door to the beginning of 2019, and it's just crazy how time flies. But I hope you've all enjoyed your summer so far. Have had some adventures and had some time to relax, had some fun. And as we're closing up the summer, we're also closing up our sermon series on the first point of our vision statement. And I actually don't have the full vision statement to share with you today, but if you haven't read it, it's on the back of our wall. It's in that frame, says our vision. And I will share the first point with you today because the last month and a half, we've been just really delving into this point of, well, I'll share it with you. Let's see. We are a place where people from all walks of life can find love, acceptance, inspiration, guidance, purpose, joy, and fulfillment. And I will be talking about fulfillment. So that's, where does fulfillment come from? And actually, I realized that this is a topic that we've kind of touched on throughout our whole series. And when we were talking about inspiration, we ended up talking about fulfillment. We were talking about joy, we ended up talking about fulfillment. Because everything within this point is leading up to fulfillment. But this is a really interesting word, I feel like. What does fulfillment really mean? And how does it make you feel when you reflect on that word? I found for myself that I couldn't really come up with words so much to describe fulfillment, but if I thought about what fulfillment felt like, I could have a feeling that came up with fulfillment, and it was a very specific feeling. So take a minute for yourself and reflect on this word and see what comes up for you. Online, I found a what's that called? Definition of fulfillment, which I feel like tries to put words to this feeling. I don't know if it does it full justice, but fulfillment is a feeling of happiness and satisfaction. It's also the completion of something, like the fulfillment of a promise. And then there was a little bit more of an explanation to this definition, so I'll go into that too. This word has two related meanings. In terms of emotions, fulfillment is a happy, contented feeling. Many people feel fulfillment from being a parent, having a great job, or graduating from school. People often feel fulfillment when something is completed, whether it's a goal or a dream or repair work that you've been waiting on, which leads to the other meaning of fulfillment, the act of finishing or doing something that was promised. So, a feeling of happiness and satisfaction, a contented feeling. So last week, Mike talked about joy. He talked how joy is not the happiness that comes from happenings, from circumstantial events that come and go in our lives, but that true joy comes from within us as something that we create through our investment into our relationships. And also realizing that actually most of us, it's so easy to get stuck on the happiness from happenings. And actually many people don't look past that. They just really want to feel happiness from the things that you can get, or something good that happens to you. And I do want to just recover this a little bit, because I feel like we can't really understand fulfillment without understanding the difference between temporary joy and happiness, real joy and happiness and fulfillment. So I found another example. I know Mike went over Philippians and Paul last week, which I thought was really beautiful. But I found a story about King Solomon in Ecclesiastes. And if you don't know a lot about King Solomon, I'm also learning myself, but he was the son of David, King David, after they established, a kingdom. And he became known far and wide as a king for his wisdom. And apparently when King Solomon was first came into power, he prayed to God, and God said, "What do you want from me? What if you could ask anything of me, what would you ask?" And King Solomon asked for wisdom, and God was happy because he didn't ask for more power or riches, but that he asked for wisdom. And so God gave him the gift of wisdom, and he became so known for his wisdom that royalty from other countries, the Queen of Sheba, would come and say, where does your wisdom come from? How can I share this with my people? You know, there's this famous story of, there was early on in his power, there was two women who both had babies, and one had died. And the one whose baby had died wanted to claim this other woman's baby as her own. So there was a plaintiff that was brought before the court, and then it was brought eventually to King Solomon. What should we do? These two women are both saying that this baby is theirs. So who should have the baby? And then King Solomon said, "Bring me a sword." And he said, "I know what we'll do. We'll cut the baby in half, and we'll give half to each mother." But then, of course, the real mother, the one who wanted to claim the baby as her own, said, "Okay, if that's all I can have, then let's do that." But the real mother said, "No. Just let the baby live, even if you give it to this other woman." And then King Solomon knew, okay, this is the real mother. Let's give the baby to the real mother. And to us, that sounds like almost a cruel way of trying to determine something. But this was back in the Old Testament, where this type of wisdom to find out by people's hearts what was right and what was wrong was revolutionary. So from this point, he really became known as the King of Wisdom. And all of Ecclesiastes is kind of his ponderings about life and about what is meaningful and what is valuable in life, and is there value in life. And I'm just going to share a couple of points from Ecclesiastes with you that he shares. This is King Solomon in his court. He was able to build the temple to God that hadn't been built before. I actually later found a larger picture of this, and the Queen of Sheba is coming up to visit him, but that's King Solomon. I said to myself, "Look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge." Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their life. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. And you know what he says at the end of each one of these songs or poems that he writes? Meaningless. It's all meaningless. And I feel like that we often look for happiness in these areas too. Some of us want to find happiness and fulfillment in our studies, in our knowledge and our wisdom. So we go and we get our bachelor's degree, and then we go and we get our master's degree, and then we go and we get our PhD. And looking for fulfillment in the understanding of knowledge and how the world works. And then some people go and they look for pleasure in pleasure, in the finer things of life, and whining and dining, and in their love relationships, and in nice cars, and in nice clothes, and purses, and shoes. But is this where true happiness comes from? And then they're also in the material things. And he was saying, you know, I've got my courtyards full of flourishing trees, and I've built houses, and I built parks. And then he in the end of that, he basically says it's dust in the wind, right? He's really a dust in the wind kind of guy. But basically, King Solomon's conclusion is that the best we can do is to live with God in our life. This is a lot that God has given us. We have our daily lives, we have knowledge, and we have pleasures, and we have our work, and we have our material possessions. And that's what we have. And the best we can do is to bring God into it and try to find joy in those things. And then there's this other, towards the end, he says, "This only have I found. God created man upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." So it's kind of showing how even though God created us with his heart and to be his reflection, we've been distracted by trying to find happiness in all of the happenings and the circumstances and in the material things. But then last week, Mike really went to show us that joy comes from our relationships with God at the center. And I did find another part from Ecclesiastes that King Solomon says, "There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. 'For whom am I toiling?' he asked, 'and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." And that's from Ecclesiastes 4, verses 8 through 12. So this is just a hint into where joy comes from our relationships. Mike really shared, the value of investing into our spouses, into our parents, into our children. And into our relationship with our heavenly parent. And this is where our true joy comes from. So then what is fulfillment? I think that the experience of fulfillment is what comes after investment into those important relationships. And these are also connected. And I kind of questioned a little bit, why do we have fulfillment in our vision statement after the word joy? Because they're so similar. But I also felt like we can't leave it out. Because on top of happiness and joy, it is very important to have the experience of fulfillment in our life. So what have you discovered about fulfillment for yourself in your reflection? Something that I discovered when I reflected on what fulfillment felt like, or what I wanted to experience, is that fulfillment is not something that you can find overnight. I think we can find the feeling of happiness in the moment. If a happiness by happening can come instantly, I can feel happy when I see a beautiful flower. I feel happiness. I think I feel joy. When I woke up this morning and came upstairs, and Nathan had been drawing a picture. Apparently he started it last night, and he finished it this morning. It was a picture of a raccoon and trees in the sun, and he was just putting all the little birds in the sky by the sun. I was really surprised because I don't normally think of him as an artistically inclined child, But here he was investing all this time into this picture, and that made me happy. It made me feel joy to see him expressing himself. So happiness and joy is something that I think we can experience almost instantaneously. But fulfillment is not like that. I really believe that fulfillment requires an investment over time. So, some of you know that I completed a race a few weeks ago. Thank you. I've had a number of people ask me if I was going to say anything about it today, so even if you've already heard about it, bear with me. I do want to share a little bit about what it was, but especially what I experienced and how it ties into my talk today. So 3 weeks ago, my sister and I competed in the MR 340, and that stands for Missouri River 340 miles. And it's a paddle race. People from all over the country, even other countries, come with their canoes and kayaks and stand-up paddle boards and dragon boats, and they put into the water in Kansas City, and they paddle 340 miles nonstop from Kansas City to St. Louis on the other. It's basically across the entire state of Missouri on the winding Missouri River. And you have 88 hours to complete it in order to say that you finished. And you can sleep if you want and when you want, but it's basically nonstop. So we actually did this 4 years ago. And a few days before this race, Mike asked me, "Why are you doing this again?" And to be honest, about 7 hours into the race, this time I was in the front, and I turned around to my sister and I was like, "I apologize for ever suggesting that we do something like this again." Because after about 7 hours, we're about 45, 50 miles into the race, and you're not even a seventh of the way done yet, but already everything is hurting, and your butt's going numb, and you're getting blisters on your hands, and you're wondering, why on earth am I voluntarily putting myself through this? But actually ended up being a fantastic experience. We just a brief overview of what we did. We paddled for about 26 hours the first day. We paddled until about 8 or 9 in the morning. There's checkpoints along the way where you can meet up with a ground crew, or there's a place where you can get food and restock your water. And my sister's college roommate was our ground crew, so she would meet us with a smile every time and pretend like we didn't really smell that bad, and that she would restock our food and water. And we slept 45 minutes at that stop, and then we got back in the boat and we paddled again, and it all kind of becomes a blur because all you really do is paddle, and that's about it. But there are beautiful parts of it too, because for one thing, my phone died and I didn't have a cable to charge it with, so I was offline for 4 days, and it was really wonderful. So I could totally be present, and every day, the first day we got to see the sunset. And it's one thing to see a beautiful sunset and be like, wow, that's beautiful. But I realized it's something different to watch it in its entirety, from the sun being directly above you and going down and the air getting cooler, and then to start to go behind the trees and the shade finally comes. And then even after it sets, the sky changes so much for an hour before it gets dark. And then there's the moon, and they always schedule it on a full moon so you can paddle by the light of the moon and the stars. And so I'm making it sound really wonderful to you, so if you ever want to do it, you can let me know. And then you paddle and paddle and paddle and paddle, and then it actually starts to get cold. The first night we were around 2 or 3 in the morning, a couple hours before sunrise, it actually starts to get, even though it's probably 65 degrees, we're expending so much energy and burning so many calories that if you stop moving, you start to shiver. And so we couldn't stop moving. We actually got out at a checkpoint where a man was getting hypothermic, so we knew we had to keep moving. And I felt God's blessing and protection so many times during this race, because that night, as it was starting to get cold, I remembered that I had left my emergency blanket in my glove compartment of my car, which was now at my parents' house, and Felicia hadn't gotten one. And we did have a survival tent, which was insulated, but we had looked at the weather and it wasn't supposed to be bad weather, so we had left it for the sake of, not carrying a lot of weight down the river. We had left it with our ground crew, and I thought, we have nothing to keep us warm if we had to stop. And then the mist started to come in, and they are very, very clear that if it gets foggy and you can't see, you should pull over, because there's barges and things that could come out of the mist. So I'm looking at my sister like, what if we have to stop and it's misty for 6 hours? We're gonna sit and we're gonna freeze. But we had an angel in the form of this nice 50-year-old man paddling next to us, and his name was Sam, and he was over-prepared. He had never done the race before, and he wanted to make sure he had everything he needed. So he had his phone, and he had 5 portable chargers to keep it charged throughout the race, and he had like 6 emergency blankets, so we were all set. So once we found out that we were paddling next to him and that he had everything that we needed, then I felt, wow, so relieved that, whatever happened could happen, we would be okay. The next day, as we were paddling, the worst part of the day is from like 1 to 6, when the sun is the hottest, and really when the sun is the hottest, it's hard to paddle. We left our checkpoint. We were going into one of the longest stretches of our race. It's like an 88-mile stretch. We knew it would take like 12 hours, so we weren't really looking forward to it. It was getting hot. But we set off. We had our water jugs with our little siphons we could drink out of. And I looked at my water jug and I realized, oh, it's only half full. We had frozen these jugs with half full of ice, and then we put water in them so they could stay nice and cold for at least a couple hours. And I thought, oh shoot, they must have forgotten to put the water into my jug. So I said, hey, Felicia, when we stop for a bathroom break, can I get some of your water? And she's like, yeah, sure. So we stop about 30 minutes later for a bathroom break. We get back into the boat, and both of our jugs are entirely empty. There is no water in our jugs. And I realized that probably when they froze them, they had left the caps on and they expanded and cracked. And so the water just melted and leaked out into our boat. And here we are on the 88-mile stretch of water, and we don't have any water besides what we're paddling on to drink. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're going to have to flag down other paddlers and beg them for their water that they need to drink so that we can survive to the... But we're just trying to come up with a plan of what we're going to do. We get on the water, and then less than 5 minutes later, a safety boat. They have these safety boats going up and down the river, but you see 1 or 2 of them a day maybe. But it comes up behind us, and so we're like, hey, and they came up and they gave us a big jug of water and cold Gatorade, and I thought, that's a really nice coincidence. Coincidence, right? I just really felt God's protection so much, and that he was taking care of us throughout our race. So anyway, we paddled through that night. We slept a couple of hours. We got back on. We paddled through the next day. And then 64 hours and 49 minutes after we started, we arrived at the finish line at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was over. So that was a little bit of how the race went. But when Mike asked me, why do you want to do this again? I actually had a couple really good answers, because it was funny. The first time we did this 4 years ago, we were just totally beat. We staggered up out of the boat into the finish line, and Mike asked us, so you think you'll ever do this again? It's on video. And we were like, no, never. But 2 weeks later, we had made a plan that 4 years later, we're going to do this again. Because one thing that I realized is that actually it's really awesome to spend 3 days with one person that you love and to get to know them really well and to go through challenges together, and you really create bonds and a deep relationship. And I really treasured that experience that I had with my sister. And in the past 4 years, we've done a lot of different things. She moved to Ohio, she got married, she's working. We moved out here, we became pastors, we had another kid, and although we see each other here and there, I feel like it's sometimes hard to have that experience where you really connect. So that was one reason why I wanted to do it again. That investment into relationships, that joy that you experience from that connection that Mike was talking about last week. Another reason why I wanted to do it again was I discovered something about myself the last time. I discovered that I had more strength than I thought I had, and I could do more than I thought I could do, and that actually humanity is so much more powerful than we believe ourselves to be, but we don't always access that power. We don't always put ourselves in a situation where we have to find that power. And I felt that even though we did that 4 years ago, that memory and that knowledge that I am a capable person, that I have a connection to infinite power through my God, made me want to re-experience that. So that's why we did it again. But when Mike said, why don't you talk about your race in the message, this Sunday, I thought, but how does that fit in with fulfillment? And he's like, really? You can't think of anything? And I was like, oh, wait, actually I can. What I learned this time that I didn't really recognize before. Okay, so when the race was finished, my sister turned and said to me, you left it all on the field. And I was like, what? And she said, it's a Frisbee term. In Frisbee, we say you left it all on the field when you did every single possible thing you could and you didn't hold anything back. You played all the plays, you gave your all, you didn't save something for later. You put your whole heart on the field, and you didn't take any of it with you. You left it all on the field. And I realized that is actually a major component of where fulfillment comes from. 100% investment into something without holding on to anything for later. I feel like I do this all the time. I always want to invest. I want to invest into my kids. I want to invest into this community. But I don't want to give everything, because then maybe I'll be too tired, or maybe I won't have the energy to do it again tomorrow. I feel like I'll give 97%, maybe 85% a lot of the time. I'll give 85%. And that, I think it looks good. It still looks good enough to people. But the experience of giving 100% of yourself so that you have nothing left when you cross the finish line, I believe connects us to God. Because that is what God invested when he created humanity. I believe that God created each one of us with 100% of his love, 100% of his creativity. He didn't hold something back for, maybe I'll create something else another time. I want to save something beautiful for later. No, God put all beauty and all love and his whole heart into creation. That's why God had to rest, because there was nothing left. And when we have that experience of giving 100%, I believe we connect to God's heart. I have a quote here. This is from Reverend Moon, the founder of our faith. I think there's supposed to be a you there. If you have anything of virtue at all in yourself, there are only two, life and love. If you give out perfect life and love, those two will be returned. We have a concept that we often talk about in our faith, which is called humanity's 5% portion of responsibility. The idea is that God has prepared and given everything to us. God created each one of us to have a beautiful, fulfilling, joyful life. And there's no reason that God made it so that any of us can't do that, right? But we are his children. We're co-creators. And we're not robots that God programs to just do good things and live a happy life, right? He gave us free will. So we have our own portion of responsibility in that process. So we say that, God prepares 95%. It's probably more like 99% of everything is prepared. And all we have to do is our little portion of responsibility. But to us, that feels like 100% of our effort. And this is kind of how I experienced that last week, 2 weeks ago. But if you give out everything, if you give out your energy, you give out your life, and you give out your love, although I feel like I hold on to it a lot of times because I don't want to lose it all, we forget that when we give, we receive, and that perfect life and love will be returned to us. So I feel that so my experience of the race is one thing. I do believe that I experienced God and fulfillment throughout this. But I don't want to say that you have to put yourself in that kind of a situation to experience love and fulfillment and joy and happiness, okay? This is one avenue that I found this in. But actually, God's purpose for us is to find fulfillment on even in deeper levels than that. And really what I feel that our deepest fulfillment comes from is in our long-term investment into our relationships, like Mike talked about last week, into our Heavenly Parent, our relationship with God, our relationship with the people in our life, whether they're our parents, our children, close friends. So into our relationships, and also that our deepest levels of fulfillment also come into investing into our legacy. So I believe this is in finding our calling, finding what God is calling us into in our life, whether it's a ministry, whether it's into helping underprivileged group of people, whether it's creating something that can benefit humankind, whether it's some people find their legacy is in finding a way to clean up the oceans. There's many different, we're all unique expressions of God, and so each one of us will find our calling in a different way. But I believe that God puts a calling on each one of our hearts, and that when we find that calling and we invest into it like this, that we can find deep fulfillment, and it's our legacy that we leave behind. Also, fulfillment builds on itself, because I realize that actually I feel a lot of fulfillment in my relationship with my husband. We've been married for almost 14 years. And when I think back on our relationship, I feel fulfillment because I know that we have something solid. I know that we have trust. I know that we have the ability to create a future together. And that gives me that settled, contented, happy feeling of fulfillment. But then that gets built on, right? Then we have children. I was just thinking about the Fleischer family. Now that they have all of their children here in this community today, that must be a feeling of fulfillment for you. Yeah, big thumbs up from Gary. And And then when our children have children and then our grandchildren grow up, I really feel like through our constant 100% investment over time, this feeling of fulfillment grows and deepens. Also, seeing the projects that you've invested in or your life's work go on to benefit many other people, that when you see that the thing that you invested in is growing and multiplying and helping other people, then there's a feeling of fulfillment. I believe that's why many of you are here in this faith community today, because you found something that you could invest in that you felt was worthwhile of your life investment. Here's another quote that goes a bit into the type of investment. What kind of men and women does God need? God has been searching for men and women who are trying to give their lives to the fullest degree, to truly become the embodiment of his own way of life, by giving totally for the sake of the spirit world and the earthly world. Until you give to the absolute degree, you will not receive in the absolute degree. Absolute giving brings absolute receiving. So fulfillment does not come quickly, overnight, or easily. But the great thing about when you find real fulfillment in your life, although it does not come quickly or easily, it is also not something that can be taken away quickly or easily or at all. It is long-lasting, and I feel like it feeds your soul, even if you go through times of challenges and difficulties. I feel like when I put this together, I kind of had this epiphany. This is what this world is missing. This is why we have so many people committing suicide. This is why we have so many people seeking for joy in all the wrong places. This is why we have so many people who are suffering from depression and trying to fill the void with other things and other happenings. Because we all have times of challenges and difficulty. There are always times we have difficulties in our relationship with our spouse. Mike and I had a lovely argument this week. There are always times when things don't work out with your finances, or your car has issues. I forgot to mention there's a dent in the back of our car, actually. I've just sprung that on him. There are always times when things don't go our way, and that is part of life. But when we find the experience of true fulfillment and joy, those things will not rock our boat, because we have a connection to the infinite love of God. We have experienced God's wholehearted love and investment into us because we know what that's like, because we've given it. This is one more quote I want to share. The most important thing is your own pride and joy that you have a certain value within yourself. You want to have a certain one direction. Then even God must follow you and come with you. But that Almighty God needs me. I am indispensable in his sight. You can have this kind of confidence and value and pride. If you achieve that value, that confidence in yourself, no joy, and I would say also no difficulty, can surpass it. I feel like this is a very bold quote, don't you? That God must follow you. That God needs me. But actually, is it so far of a stretch to believe that? Because God created us as co-creators, not as robots, not people just to do his bidding. God created us as co-creators. And I feel, going back to King Solomon, I think that this is what King Solomon couldn't get in his lifetime, for all his wisdom, for all his great accomplishments, for all of his 1,000 wives and concubines, that he couldn't get this point. Because throughout Ecclesiastes, after all his ponderings, he would say, this is meaningless. At one point, he even said, after everything that I do, am I nothing more than an animal? Because we all go to the same place, from dust to dust, dust in the wind. That was his mantra. And in the end, they call it the Apostasy of Solomon, right? So King Solomon, even though he established his temple, even though he ruled for many years, even though he had great wisdom, towards the end of his life, he left God. He disobeyed God's laws. He disobeyed God's heart. He abandoned God, and God could not bless his kingdom anymore. So I think that King Solomon missed. And this was the Old Testament. This was when people were still chopping and babies in half, so maybe I can understand. But he didn't get that he was a co-creator with God, and that he had a value that God needed. He wasn't just dust in the wind. And this is, I feel like, God's gift to us. And this is the blessing that we have the understanding of, is that we have the value of co-creating with God. We co-create our life. We co-create our relationships. There's nothing out there that tells you that your relationship with your child has to be a certain way, or that there will always be this difficulty between you and your spouse because of this. No, we create that. We create our legacy through finding God's special writing and calling on our heart and investing with that 100% absolute investment into it. Then we find this true fulfillment that I think King Solomon couldn't grasp. So our sincere desire and hope in this community and through our vision statement is that each one of us is able to live a life of fulfillment, where we get to enjoy the eternal fruits of our investment. It's not dust in the wind. That each person has fulfilling eternal relationships with their parents, their spouse, their children, the people in your life. And that each one of us can find our calling, a life's work that has a legacy that benefits others, even beyond our own time on this earth. So with that, I'll finish up our sermon series. I can't wait to start our next one. Please join me in prayer. Most beloved Heavenly Parent, good morning. Thank you for a beautiful day, the beautiful end of summer. Thank you for all of the families, our brothers and sisters, your children who have gathered here today, looking for your heart, looking for your guidance, looking to give something back to you, Heavenly Parent. I think that was a bold quote that I read, that God, that you can follow us, that you need us. But I think that if there's one thing that's you've been trying to get through to humanity, is that you need us, and that there is a partnership between us, and that our true fulfillment comes from finding that relationship and investing into it. Heavenly Parent, please be with each one of us as we go through our life. We go through difficulties. We go through the daily challenges of life. We go through diapers. We go through oil changes. We all go through these same things. Sometimes they seem mundane. But you have a calling in our heart, and you have a path for each of us to find true and lasting joy and true fulfillment in this life, on this earth, and eternally. Please be with us as we walk our path, as we walk our life. Help us to find these callings. Help us to find these relationships, and help us to come closer to you. I offer this prayer now in my name, Michael and Adonia Hendrick, Bless Central family, and all the families here. Amen and adieu. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Pastor Adonia. I loved every part of that except for finding out that there's a dent in our car. It's great news. So I hope you all enjoyed as well and got something out of that. I know I did. We're going to have a short time for reflection and meditation, so we'll have some music on. If you haven't given your offering, there's an opportunity with greeters will come down the aisle with the basket, and you can give your offering if you haven't already done it. There's some envelopes in the pews. So we're going to go ahead and go into some of our announcements, our local announcements. And then after that, the kids will be excused for Sunday school, although I think a lot of them have left already. So our first announcement is that right after service, just like every week, we will have a short presentation. It's about 20 minutes. And this is just a presentation that we have prepared to just share a little bit with you about who we are. Like I mentioned, it's very brief, and it just goes into the history of our church, why we are where we're at, what's our vision for the future, what does it mean to become a part of our community. And as many of you, as you might notice, especially if you're new, we have a maybe unique way of doing things many times that you won't see at other churches. So it gives us an opportunity to be able to share why that is. And I'll be giving that in the French ministry room, which is right next to the cafe here, right during lunch today. Also, every Thursday at 7 p.m., my father, Dr. Hendrick, is doing a Bible study. So I invite you to please come and join if that's something that you're looking for in your life, a deeper understanding of the Bible. I know that he prepares a lot in advance and prepares topics that are relevant to, our lives and how the Bible speaks to us today in our lives. So I invite you to come and join it. It's every Thursday at 7 p.m. in the cafe right over here. This Friday, we're having a movie night. This movie is Ghost. It's a little bit of an older movie, but if you haven't seen it, it's a really great movie, and it really goes into especially the spiritual side of life. And that'll be at 7 p.m., and that'll be right here, and there'll be some popcorn and basic refreshments provided. Lastly, or not lastly, but close to lastly, we have really premium divine principle workshops and retreats that are available at our really nice education center in Las Vegas. We do them every month, and you can see here kind of a schedule of the next few that are coming up, 4-day and 7-day retreats. This is really the opportunity to just let go of everything else in your life, work, and maybe any other drama that might be going on, just really be able to have a chance to focus in on the divine principle, your relationship with God, deepening your faith. So these are really great opportunities, and everyone who's gone has just told me so many great things about it. So if there's a date on here that you see and you really want to be able to attend, please let us know, and we'd like to help you to be able to get there. And then lastly, next week, the Martinez family is cooking and cleaning. So thank you to the Martinez family, and also thank you to the Vanderstock family for cooking and cleaning this morning. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay, so that's all for our local announcements. Any Sunday school kids who haven't gone yet are welcome to go. And our older Sunday school kids are actually visiting a mosque today. So a lot of them are out and about, and we'll see them a little bit later.